So we're really looking forward to a great presentation today on sociable weavers. Rita is a behavioral and evolutionary ecologist, and she actually just finished defending her PhD. And congratulations, Dr. Fortuna. Very exciting. So she's worked on sociable weavers and the Sociable Weaver project for 6 years now. So she's a wealth of knowledge about this topic that she'll be covering today. And her research is focused on maternal reproductive strategies and how these vary according to ecological and social factors. So welcome, Dr. Fortuna. We're excited for your presentation, and we're looking forward to hearing all about it.
Thank you very much, Krista, for this very nice introduction. So I'll start sharing my screen. And at the same time, before I start, so do you see my screen now? Yeah.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, so before I start, I would just like to thank you for this invitation to share my work with this amazing community. And us as researchers, we don't have the chances often to share our work with a broader audience besides our colleagues and peers. And so I think that this is a very, very rich community and a very nice platform to do this. And so I'm very thankful for the invitation to share my work with you. I tried to make it as simple and as light as possible so that everyone, even if you're not a researcher, you can understand what I'm talking about and what we try to study in sociable weavers. So Krista, can you just confirm that you hear me well and that you see the screen right so that I can move on?
Yeah, hear you loud and clear, and everything looks good on your presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so today I will tell you about the work that I developed during my PhD, using sociable weavers as a study system. And I'll try to give you a mother's, or the importance, I'll try to tell you about the importance of the mother's perspective on her environment. But first I thought I should introduce myself and my background. So I grew up in Portugal, more specifically in this town in the north coast called Porto. And if you're wondering, yes, this is where port wine comes from. And yes, you should visit. And so I was lucky enough to grow up in a city where one of the biggest universities of Portugal is the University of Porto. And this is where I obtained my degrees from my bachelor in biology up to my PhD. But to be honest, along this journey, I started traveling far, far south to South Africa, more specifically Kimberley, because this is where the Sociable Weaver project is established. And I joined the Sociable Weaver project as a master student and fell in love with these birds and how fascinating they are. And so kept studying them during my PhD. While doing my PhD, I was mostly working in research centers in Portugal and France, so CBU, which is in Porto, and CEF, which is an associated research center to the CNRS and is located in Montpellier. And just a brief summary of where I am now. So I just finished my PhD, as you said, and I just moved to a new position in Norway. So I'm a postdoc here, and I'm working on different topics. So on seasonal migration versus residence in these birds called European shags. And so far I have nothing to show you on this because I just moved, but stay tuned if you are also interested in this topic. Hopefully soon I'll have some results to show. And yeah, we'll work with this great team of researchers, Jane, Paul, Francis, and many other colleagues working with the shags. But today I will tell you about the work that I developed during my PhD. And so I will start by introducing you the study system of the sociable weavers and their biology. I will then jump into explaining what we study in the Sociable Weaver project, the type of data that we collect, and the broad questions that we try to answer with this research project. I will then try to explain you the type of work and the results that I obtained during my PhD on maternal reproductive strategies in sociable weavers. And I will end with some conclusions and implications of these results in a broader context. So this is a sociable weaver, and maybe the crowd from South Africa has already seen these birds out in the field. They are endemic to Southern Africa. So as you can see in the map in purple, there's the sociable weaver distribution across South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana. And as you can also see in the map, it greatly overlaps with the distribution of the Kalahari Desert region. So these birds mostly inhabit arid and semi-arid savanna regions. And the white circle represents the location of our study site, so where the Sociable Weaver project is established in Kimberley, South Africa. So sociable weavers are not very big or very heavy birds. They also don't look very colorful, or and the sexes look alike. And they're also a species of least concern in the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species from 2016. So you may be wondering, like, why do we study these birds? What's so fascinating about them that she can't shut up about it? Well, I think this is one of the most fascinating nests I've ever seen. And so this is a sociable weaver colony. And this huge structure can weigh several tons and be several meters large and wide. And sociable weavers live colonially in this structure. So they are a colonial species. And besides this, they build this structure together. So all birds contribute to the maintenance of these colonies that can last for several generations. And if you notice in the photo, you can see that in this colony, there are several holes, or what we call chambers, which is where the birds roost and breed. And I would like to point out that the chambers are not interconnected. They are independent chambers. Another very interesting aspect of these birds' biology is that they are a facultative cooperative breeder. And this means that the parents, so the mother and the father, may be assisted by other individuals in raising their young. So to these individuals, we usually call helpers. And cooperative breeding is not restricted to birds. It occurs across many taxa, and even in mammals and in humans. So we are cooperative breeders. And if you think of how our older children or how our parents can help us raise our own children, it's easy to see the parallel with the behavior of these species. And so studying cooperatively breeding species can even help us understand the evolution of our own species and the social system. And so in the Sociable Weaver project, we're investigating the causes and the consequences of this social behavior. And before I jump into explaining what kind of data we collect in the Sociable Weaver project, I thought I should give you an overview of the kind of research that we do. And so in the Sociable Weaver projects, most of us are behavioral ecologists. And what does this mean? According to the International Society for Behavioral Ecology, it means that we study the fitness consequences of behavior. And so we do this by studying not only animal behavior, but also questions on evolutionary biology, population ecology, physiology, etc., with the common aim of understanding how animals have adapted to their environment. And so, in other words, to try and understand what an individual gains in terms of fitness by doing this rather than that. And since we're talking about fitness, I thought I should also define what I mean by this word. So here I don't mean physical fitness, but I mean fitness in a Darwinian perspective, so in light of natural selection. And so fitness would be a measure of the reproductive success of an individual over its lifetime, or how successful an individual is in transmitting its genes to the next generation. So after we understand a bit better the kind of questions that we're trying to answer and what is fitness and what is behavioral ecology, it's natural to think that to do this kind of studies, we cannot only describe a behavior, but we also need data on how long individuals live, so on the survival, and their reproductive output during their lifetime, to be able to understand the consequences of their behavior on their fitness. And so jumping back to the Sociable Weaver project, we've been collecting presence and survival data of sociable weavers in our study site since 1993. And this is the year I was born. So I'm saying this so that you understand how much effort it must have been to continue funding and getting people out there in the field to keep this project running for so many years, and collecting so much data so that now students like me can work on it and explore all the fascinating questions, research questions about these birds. So every year in winter, before they start to breed, we set up mist nets next to the colonies, and we capture the monitored colonies. So this represents around several hundreds of birds captured every winter. And you can also see there the total number of ringed individuals that we have in our database. And besides the survival data, we also collect detailed breeding data. So we monitor every single nest of these colonies in our study site. Currently, we're monitoring around 15 different sociable weaver colonies. And so this means that in some seasons, these may represent over 1,000 clutches being monitored in just one season. So it's a lot of data, which is very, very cool, but at the same time, it's a lot of work. And it's thanks to the current project leaders, Rita Covas and Claire Dutrelin, that the project has been running for the past years and has been, and all this data is collected every year and worked on by several researchers. So Rita actually gave a seminar for Learn the Birds. I don't know how long ago, but I know that it's available on YouTube. So if you want to know about other research questions that we address in the Sociable Weaver project that are not related to my work, please go and watch her seminar. And so, yes, besides Rita and Claire, that I would like to acknowledge, of course, for all their efforts in keeping the Sociable Weaver project running and giving us the chance to work with this absolutely fantastic data set collected over many years. There's also many researchers, technicians, and collaborators and students that have been involved in my work. And these are just some of the ones that I would like to acknowledge, specifically Mathieu Paquet, who was also a supervisor during my PhD, and my closer colleagues and the co-authors in the work that I will show you today. And of course, it's impossible to collect this amount of data without the passion of many ornithologists and field technicians that join the Sociable Weaver project every season. And so thank you to them for their energy and their efforts, and for helping us collecting this data. And so after working several years with this species, we can better describe this social system that they have. And so we know that in sociable weavers, the majority of the helpers are offspring of one or both of the breeders. And we also know that both females and males can help. And their helping at the nest mainly consists of bringing food to the chicks and also helping with nest building and maintenance. And so we could predict that having helpers could influence the individual's fitness, so the fitness of the breeders. But it's important to take into account that helpers are just one of the components of this very complex natural environment in which sociable weavers live in. And so if we want to study how sociable weavers can maximize their fitness in this natural environment, we should look at, of course, their social context, but also not overlook these other important environmental variables that are part of this savanna-like environment, and specifically the one we find in Kimberley in South Africa. And so how could sociable weavers maximize their fitness in their natural environment? One way in which we know that individuals may increase their reproductive output over a lifetime is by using environmental cues to adjust how much energy they will invest in reproduction. So for instance, this could be done by saving energy when the conditions are unfavorable or when they have more help, and instead allocate more energy to reproduction once the conditions improve. And so if we look at a practical example, this could mean, for instance, changing the amount or the quality of the care that the parents provide to their offspring. Let's say parents are in an environment where food is very scarce or there are many predators around. They may provide less care to their offspring and maybe save energy for their future reproduction once these conditions improve. However, these may not only occur once offspring are born, but there may actually be adjustments before birth. And so individuals can adjust the amount and the quality of resources allocated to their offspring before birth. So in case of birds, this means changing the number of eggs, the size of the eggs, and its composition. But in mammals, it can equally occur by the constant exchange that there is between the mother and the offspring via the placenta. And so it is known by several studies that looked at how the quantity and the quality of these resources that are allocated to offspring before they are born. And it's known that this can affect offspring development, not only before birth, but also after, as well as their behavior and survival. So this may actually be a very important adjustment and a very important point in life that can shape how offspring develop later on. And so in my PhD, I wanted to understand specifically how sociable weavers females would invest in reproduction as their environment varied, as well as how could these adjustments affect breeding females and their offspring in terms of fitness. And so to try to show you the results that we obtained, I thought I could bring you the example of one sociable weaver female, a breeding female, and I decided to call her Precious because after a quick Google search, I saw that it's a very common name in South Africa for baby females. So Precious is a South African sociable weaver, and so naturally she has an identity card. And I brought her card here just to show you the type of data that we have for each bird that is part of our monitored population. And so here we can see, for instance, that her name is Precious, she's a female, although we don't know her birth colony. And this is because in sociable weavers, females are the dispersing sex. And so Precious was probably born in a colony that is next to our study area, but outside of the monitored colonies. So we don't know where she was born, and consequently, we don't know her age. But then she arrived to one of our monitored colonies to breed. And so the first time she was captured, she was given a ring, a metal ring with a number. And we also measured the size of her tarsus and her wing and mass, which we collect every time that we capture a bird. And that's why here I'm showing a range, because Precious since then has been captured for several winters, and we can know the range of weight that she had during these years. We also have a lot of information on her breeding activity. And so we know that she's a breeder at colony 8 because all of our monitored colonies have a different number. And so Precious decided to disperse to colony 8 and stay there as a breeder. She's been a breeder for 5 years, and during this time had 2 different partners. probably because one of them died, as divorce is very rare in sociable weavers, as we found out recently. During this time, Precious laid 30 eggs, of which 18 ended up fledging. So it's a quite good number for a sociable weaver. And so I hope that with this you can have a sense of the information that we collect for each bird in our population, and how precious this information is to then try and understand their reproductive output and their survival, and any questions related to this. And so to study maternal reproductive strategies in sociable weavers, we first started by counting the number of helpers that Precious had. And so in this case, in this breeding attempt, we found out that Precious had a group size of 4, which means that besides her and her breeding partner, that she had 2 helpers that would assist her in raising her young. And so in this scenario, we could ask, how could Precious maximize her fitness given that she has these helpers with her? So could she maybe adjust the size of her eggs? And if so, how? Maybe she will invest more in her eggs because she is breeding in a good environment with many helpers, or maybe she will invest less and so save energy, and maybe helpers can compensate for this reduction. So this is what we tried to understand in this study. And so we compared the case of Precious with the case of other female. So in this case, I called her Princess, and yes, you guessed well, this is the second most popular name in South Africa. So Princess instead, she didn't have helpers. So it was only her and her partner that were going to take care of the offspring in this breeding attempt. And so how do we expect these 2 females to invest in reproduction? Will it be different, or will it be similar, and who will invest more and less? So what we found in this study was that Precious, who had more helpers, was the female laying lighter eggs, and Precious, who had no helpers, laid heavier eggs. And so with this study, we thought, okay, maybe females may be saving energy when they have more helpers, and so they will lay lighter eggs, and these later on may be compensated because helpers will bring additional amount of food to the chicks, and so at the end there will be no big differences, and females will have saved energy. And this work was done by Mathieu Paquet and co-authors who were Mathieu was the first one to lead studies in maternal investment in relation to helpers in sociable weavers. And this is a study comprising only 1 year, so 1 breeding attempt of the females. So we were here looking at differences between females. And when I joined the project, me and Mathieu and the other co-authors went back to this question and did a follow-up study, which used data that was collected over 9 breeding seasons. And so this is to show you the difference between the study then and this new study. So in this case, we didn't have information only on one of Precious' breeding attempts, but on the 5 years that she's been a breeder over this 9-year period where we conducted our study. And as you can see, the number of helpers that she has at each breeding attempt can vary. And so we had the same type of data for Princess, and actually for over 100 other females. And so that bred during this period that we were studying. And so the importance of having this type of data is that now we can actually try to understand whether the same female, so whether Precious, has her number of helpers changes, could adjust reproductive investment instead of just looking at differences between females. And what we found was that she didn't. So Precious did not lay lighter or heavier eggs as she gained and lost helpers throughout the years that she was breeding. And the same was seen for Princess and for the other females. And so if we go back to the conclusions that I had showed you before of our 1-year study, we see that this is probably not as we thought. and that females do not seem to be able to adjust egg mass to the number of helpers that they have. Either they're not able or this is not beneficial for them. So then we thought, okay, how else could she maximize her fitness and make use of these helpers for her own advantage? Maybe she's adjusting the number of eggs laid per clutch, so clutch size. And so in the same way that we studied egg mass, we looked at differences in the clutch size of Precious as her number of helpers changed. And Precious did not lay more or less eggs as she gained and lost helpers. So again, it does not seem beneficial for Precious to adjust the number of eggs she lays in relation to her social context. But we didn't give up, and we had another hypothesis. So maybe this adjustment is more refined, and it's not about the size or the number of eggs, but the actual composition of the eggs laid by the females. And so to look at these, we looked at in two different seasons, we collect a few of the eggs that Precious laid to study its composition. And so we took these eggs to the lab to be able to measure components in terms of nutrients, so the mass of the yolk, but also its content in terms of lipids, proteins, carotenoids, vitamins, and also some hormones, to try and understand whether there were differences in terms of the number of helpers that females had. So we saw that Precious laid eggs with heavier yolks and more lipids when she had more helpers. So this means that there may actually be a fine adjustment of investment when females have more helpers in terms of the amount of nutrients that they allocate to their eggs. So females, in conclusion, do not seem to adjust egg mass or clutch size to their number of helpers, but they may be investing more in their eggs by changing the amount of yolk and lipid content in them. But as I said before, the social context is just one component of this natural environment. And if you've been to the African savanna and the one in Southern Africa, you can see that you will know that it changes drastically with rainfall levels. And so, of course, Precious, during her years as breeder, has been through a huge range of rainfall and temperature levels, not only across seasons, but also within the same breeding season. And these two photos are just to show you how her environment, so this is Benfontaine Nature Reserve in Kimberley, and this is just to show you how her environment may change so much from a high rainfall summer on the left, where everything is green and there's plenty of food around, to a low rainfall summer, as in the right, as in the photo on the right, where it's really, really dry and very hard to find insects and food. And so we may think of how this may affect reproductive investment of Precious and how she could maximize her fitness in these two different environments. Is it better to always do the same thing, either if it's a very good high rainfall summer or a very dry one, or is it better to adjust? So we looked at, in the same way that we did before with the number of helpers, we looked at differences in reproductive investment as climatic conditions varied. And we saw that there were no detectable differences in egg mass between periods where rainfall was very high or when the weather was very dry and there was no rainfall. However, Precious laid the largest clutches when she was breeding after high periods of rainfall. And so this means that Precious and Sociable Weaver females in general may be able to use cues of their environment, either rainfall or how rainfall changes the landscape and the amount of insects and so on, and adjust reproductive investment accordingly by increasing the number of eggs they lay per clutch. But this is not the only environmental challenge that they have to face. So Precious, across her lifetime as a breeder, had plenty of encounters with snakes at her colony. And these snakes are mostly Cape cobras and boomslangs in Kimberley. And so they can predate eggs and chicks and often stay at the colony several days, a bit like a fridge. So they just go there and visit the nest every time they're hungry, and they can basically predate a full colony. So snakes are actually the main predator of nests or of offspring for sociable weavers. And so Precious for sure saw snakes many, many times while she was a breeder, but this only happened until her colony became part of an experiment. And this experiment was aimed at reducing nest predation in some of the colonies, including the one where Precious was living. And so this experiment was very simple. We basically wrapped plastic cling film around the tree trunk. And so this makes it much harder for snakes to climb up because they slide. And this actually, believe it or not, this actually reduced a lot the predation that sociable weaver suffered at the nest. And so Precious was part of this experiment for 3 breeding seasons. And during this period of time, the fledging success at her colony was 2 times higher than the fledging success at natural colonies. So this is to show you how well this experiment worked and how it changed the environment in which Precious was in. And so again, of course, we can ask the question of how females invest in these 2 different conditions. Can they adjust? Can they perceive this as a cue of a better, of a worse, or a worse environment and adjust their reproductive investment accordingly? This is a recurrent result. So again, we did not see egg mass differences for females that were breeding in natural colonies or in protected colonies. And this is very interesting. Again, we see that females in protected colonies laid clutches with more eggs. And so this suggests that females may be able to use some cues that of their environment, either because they don't see as many snakes around or because they know that they've been having a very high reproductive success because they haven't had snakes in a long time. And so they may use these cues and adjust the reproductive investment accordingly by laying more eggs per clutch. And so more eggs mean the possibility of fledging more chicks and having more chicks in the population, which is very, very important for reproductive success and for fitness. So just to summarize what we understood with this work, first of all, in terms of egg mass. And so this plot basically shows the effect that our model predicted for each of these variables, so rainfall, our predation experiment, and the number of helpers on egg mass. And to put it simply, what we can say from this plot is that, so the circles represent the mean estimated effect on egg mass, and the bars just say how confident we are that the effect is around this mean and that the effect is positive or negative. So for instance, here in this bar, you can see that we're quite confident that it's mostly positive, even though it crosses 0. So there is a little chance that this effect is negative, while here there is a higher chance that this effect is negative. But what it means in general is that we did not find very strong effects of any of these variables on egg mass variation, and we also did not find clearly positive or negative effects. So in general, we can say that egg mass was found to be quite consistent across these different environmental conditions. However, for clutch size, the story is quite different. And here in this plot instead, you can see that there is a very clear positive effect of rainfall levels and of being in a treatment of reduced nest predation on increases in clutch size. However, if we look at number of helper effect again, we can see that it's very close to 0. And so females may increase the size of their clutches in better breeding environments, but number of helpers does not seem to be one of the variables that leads to increases in clutch size. And just to end about the environment of these birds and what Precious, all the encounters with all the nasty encounters that Precious had during her lifetime. So of course, in this environment, there are not only predators for the offspring, but also predators for flying birds. And Precious is most scared of gabar goshawks because these birds of prey are the most common predator of sociable weavers at our study site. They're very fast birds of prey that can seize weavers and other birds during their flight. And they're usually found hunting next to sociable weaver colonies. And so we did this very mean thing where we simulated the presence of this predator next to Precious' colony before she laid her eggs. And so here you can see the setup of this experiment. On this tree next to the colony tree, we had a playback system, and there you can see the colony, and there's Precious sleeping. And so I thought I should show you how a gabar goshawk sounds like, and let's hope you can hear it. I hope you heard this, but otherwise I can repeat it at the end. So yeah, quite scary call, right? And we simulated the presence of this predator by broadcasting these calls several mornings and waking up Precious with them. But of course, if you've done research yourself, or if you've been around these researchers for long enough, you will know that for every experiment that we do, we also need a control. And so a control is useful because it will tell us whether any differences that we see between the two conditions will be actually because we broadcasted the calls of this predator, or just because we were there annoying the birds with our speaker and they didn't like it. So in both of these conditions, there was a speaker and there was a box and there was a playback, but in one of them, there was a predator, and the other one, there was a ring-necked dove. And so these doves are harmless for sociable weavers. They are usually found next to the colonies, and hopefully Precious is not scared of them. And this is how they sound like. Lovely call. They can call continuously. When I say continuously, they really don't stop for hours and hours. So Precious is quite used to them, I can guarantee. And so, of course, again, we can ask whether the reproductive investment of Precious may be affected by these experiments. So does Precious maintain her reproductive investment if she's in an environment where she thinks that there are many predators around, and predators for herself this time? Yes, you may have guessed this one. So we found that egg mass was similar between females that were in the predator treatment and in the control treatment. And in this case, we also found that females did not change their clutch size in the predator treatment. And so this is very interesting to think about because in this case, we know that females are able to adjust clutch size to other conditions of their environment, as we just saw, so in relation to rainfall or to nest predation. And so this is a very interesting result to find here. Because what we did find was that there were finer adjustments. And so females in the predator treatment laid eggs with lower yolk mass, so lighter yolks. And if you ask me why I think this is, and one of the reasons may be because this is a much more reversible strategy. So let's imagine that you lay one less egg because there is a predator around. You will never have the chance of raising this chick later on because you didn't lay that egg. But if you adjust or if you reduce your investment by reducing the amount of energy or the amount of nutrients that you allocate from yourself to your egg, then this may be reversible, right? So if this gabar goshawk leaves and leaves you at peace, raising your chicks, then you may just need to work a little bit harder later on and compensate for this reduction and make sure your chicks stay alive. So this would be my hypothesis in explaining this result. And so we went a little bit further in this work and tried to understand how this treatment, so how this experiment may be affecting offspring once they are born. And we also found that females in the predator treatment had offspring with a tendency for lower hatching success. And so this could be partially explained by these lighter yolks that these eggs have, which then lead to less available nutrients for offspring development, and so more hatching failure. So let's go back to the initial questions and try to summarize all the stuff I told you here in this talk. So our first question was how sociable weaver females invest in reproduction as their environment varies. And for egg mass, we basically can conclude that it's quite consistent across different environmental conditions and probably is very individual dependent. So what we know is that egg mass can be quite different from female A to female B. So from precious to princess, let's say, but the eggs of precious will be quite consistent in their size. On the other hand, we saw that females laid larger clutches when breeding in higher rainfall conditions or when no nest predators were around. And we also saw positive investment when females had more helpers or when there were no adult predators around. And in this case, it was in terms of the amount of nutrients that they deposit in the eggs. And so we can conclude from these results that females do not seem able to adjust egg mass, but may lay more eggs and legs with more nutrients when they are breeding in better breeding conditions and in better conditions. And so we can include number of helpers in this quality of the breeding or as a sign of a good breeding environment, because we saw that females laid eggs with more nutrients when they had more helpers. And in terms of how these adjustments could affect breeding females and their offspring, so we know that having access to nutrients in the egg may be beneficial for offspring because it may mean that they have more access to nutrients during their development and even in the first few days after hatching, because they will use the nutrients that are in this yolk in the first days after hatching. And so this could increase offspring survival, for instance, through hatching success, but also later on. But not all adjustments need to benefit offspring. And as we saw in the example of sociable weavers, females could be increasing their own reproductive output, their reproductive success, by laying more eggs in better breeding conditions. So by taking advantage of when the environment is very good to breed and to try and have as many chicks as possible without compromising their survival too much. And so if there is something you take home after this talk, I would like it to be that long-term research is really essential to address these kind of questions, because as we saw, when we looked at things in 1 year, we had a very different conclusion than when we looked at things in the long term. And this is because in the long term, we have a much more powerful data set, and we can actually look at the life of an individual, see how their environment changed, and whether individuals are able or not to adjust their behavior, reproductive investment, and so on to these changes in their environment. And so in the case of sociable weavers, we saw that they may adjust reproductive investment to their environment, and this is the case for many birds. And so this makes us think of how the current environmental change that we're causing may affect species and populations, because it may not only affect their habitat or their survival, but also their decisions in terms of reproductive investment, which can equally have consequences for population growth. And lastly, I hope I gave you an idea of the importance of the mother's perspective in all in this environment and in all environments. So mothers can have an important role in adjusting these reproductive investments, especially before birth, because females are the ones in births laying the eggs, and so that will probably adjust more or suffer more with changes in their environment and adjust accordingly. So that's it on my side. I'd just like to thank you for listening and thank everyone that was part of this work. Of course, there were many, many people involved in this work, not just me. And so, this is just a final slide to acknowledge them all. And I hope you are still there listening. And I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have, any kind of question. So feel free to just ask.
Thank you, Rita. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So let's see, anybody who has any questions, please put them in the chat on the right and we will make sure we get to them.
Should I stop sharing my screen now, Krista? Or
you can leave it on there, I think. That's
okay.
Fine. Or, actually, maybe if you stop sharing them, people will be able to see you a little bit better as you're answering questions.
I'll try to do that.
Great. Yeah, perfect. Let's see. So John asks, will it be possible to see if the females adjust offspring sex ratio in different conditions?
Yes, it would definitely be possible as long as we let the eggs hatch. And we haven't looked at it, but it does seem that until the fledging period, there is a 50-50 ratio of males and females in the population. So there doesn't seem to be any difference in general, but we would have to look into specific adjustments to specific conditions, which we haven't so far.
Great. And let's see, Lester asks, are pygmy falcons significant in the survival?
So whether they are significant in the survival, I wouldn't know, but I know that they can use sociable weaver. So they can use the nest, some of these holes that are in the colonies to nest themselves, and maybe they can predate on sociable weaver eggs, but maybe Rita Kovacs, who I see is here, she can help me out with this question or answer in the chat.
Hi. Hi everyone. Yeah, the pygmy falcons can take juvenile or recently fledged sociable weavers, so they don't have a significant, very strong impact on their survival, but they can take actually, let me turn my camera on and just say hi. But yeah, they can take fledglings and sometimes chicks. We've seen them taking chicks from inside the nest. Robert Thompson at the FITS at UCT in Cape Town, he's studying the falcons and weaver interactions in swallows. So yeah, so he will find out more about that.
Nice to see you again, the other Rita.
Hello.
Let's see, Oscar, thank you so much, Rita, for helping answer that question too. Oscar asks, are social weavers able to respond to dissuade either type of their predators? And is this something a helper could assist with?
Yeah, thank you for your question. That's a very good question. So in terms of the snakes, we do see them mobbing the snakes, and several individuals could come and mob. So of course, helpers could be part of this group of individuals, even though they're not very successful. So they do try to send them away, but yeah, they're usually not successful, and snakes end up having the profit of that event. And then in terms of the goshawk, I mean, you could do everything that birds do to escape predation. So we know that if they are in a larger group, each individual will decrease its chances of being predated. So being careful enough with that, not being caught flying alone or foraging alone. This could be a way in which sociable weavers could avoid being predated by this bird of prey.
You know, it's so interesting. I was actually thinking with that nest structure, how large it is. If they're being depredated a lot, will they rebuild that whole colony in a new location, or will they continue to use that spot even if snakes kind of know where to go?
So the work and the time that it requires to build a new colony, I think, would be too much of a damage to these birds to start from scratch just because the environment is not suitable. I think, I don't exclude that possibility, but so just to let you know, these colonies can last for many, many years across generations. There are some colonies that are known to have lasted decades or even a century. So they're really a structure that birds have invested a lot of work into building and maintaining. And me personally, I've never seen a sociable weaver colony being built from scratch. So so most of the colonies that we are following in the study area, they were there and showed up or it can also happen that some colonies have these periods where they are larger and then they decline. There are still some individuals around, and then for some reason, some individuals colonize again this colony and it becomes bigger again. But usually it's a non-changeable structure. It will be there, and they should choose very well where they build their colony.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Let's see, so Katya asks, do you know why females are the dispersing sex?
Why females and not males? Maybe that's what she means. So in birds, it's usually the case that females are the dispersing sex, and so there needs to be a dispersing sex to vary the genes that are available, so that birds don't end up mating with their relatives. There always needs to be some birds that disperse somewhere else, and so these will make the population stable and going. And in the case of sociable weavers and several bird species, it's the females that disperse.
Great. And let's see, Tari says, it seems that this sort of personal adjustment to predators is opposite than it is often on a species level where more offspring is produced in cases where high losses of offspring can be expected. Sorry. Do you see that question?
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean, Terry. So you're saying that across species, it's usually the case that when there are high losses of offspring, they will produce more offspring. So in the case of sociable weavers, I think what happens is that, so this is something that I didn't add so much to the talk because to make it simple, but actually sociable weavers can lay several clutches within the same season. And they do this very often when their clutches are predated. So they can suffer several predation events in the same season. They are actually very good and fast at relaying a new clutch. And so it's quite impressive, the capacity of these females to keep laying several clutch as long as the conditions are good, or as soon as they are, and as they lose the clutch for some reason, which is usually the presence of a snake. And so that's how I think sociable weavers have adapted to this presence of these current predator snakes, which as temperatures are high, as long as temperatures are high, snakes are probably likely around. Yeah. And for the number of offspring in sociable weavers is actually quite low. So the mean clutch size of a sociable weaver is around 3 eggs, even though they can lay between 2 and 5 eggs. But most of the clutches are actually of just 3 eggs.
Great, thank you. Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you.
I asked that question as a statement and then I got myself confused.
That's okay, don't worry.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions? Those are all I see in the chat. Those are a lot of really, really good questions. Thank you so much. Okay, Lloyd has a question. The weight of the large nest often causes a tree to break and maybe lose the nest. Any idea how significant this would be to the colony loss?
So of course that if the tree breaks, then this will probably mean that the colony collapsed and the social weavers cannot live there anymore. And what is interesting is that what we usually see is that the weavers will go and occupy some chambers or create new chambers at already existing colonies and not fly as a group and build a new colony from scratch. And so yes, this tree breaking would definitely lead to colony loss. Yes.
Thank you.
There was a tree that had collapsed in Namibia. It was quite alongside the road, like a picnic site, and the birds were still using the nest on the ground.
Yeah, so I think that if they would have chicks there, it's very likely that they would try to fledge those chicks before abandoning the colony.
Yeah, that was in December, so probably they would have had.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it has also happened in our study site that colonies that collapse for maybe storms, or I don't remember the reason exactly, but the birds were still seen visiting the chambers when they had offspring. But I'm guessing as soon as the offspring would fledge or die, that they would occupy other chambers somewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially since, you know, after a storm or if a nestling just falls out of a tree, out of a nest, if the parents are still able to care for it in a secure location under a bush or something like that, then they'll continue doing that until it's able to successfully fledge on its own.
Is that a question?
No. I was just saying it makes sense. It makes sense that they would keep feeding them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's see, Audrey asks, in the case of a partial collapse, do the weavers repair?
Yeah, they can absolutely repair after if some parts of the colony collapse. And I think it's very common that these colonies keep changing shape, which is very fascinating. So it really depends. So for instance, if the number of birds living at that colony is very large, it's very likely that the whole colony is very pretty and maintained, and there are many nests around. But as soon as the number of birds in a colony starts decreasing, some of these nests will stop being used. And so there is not a huge point in maintaining these nests that are not being used by any bird. And I'm guessing that the birds would mostly invest in the main structure, but not really in maintaining all of these nests together and pretty. So I think that these colonies can change in shape a lot depending on how many birds are around, and some parts may collapse. And so it usually happens, for instance, that you have a huge colony the size of a tree and it collapses in the middle where there are less branches to hold it, and so there will be two different parts of the colony at some point. So we still consider it the same colony because these birds live very close from each other in any case, but there can be two different independent parts, let's say.
Yeah, you see that in the Kalahari quite a lot. The tree is collapsed in the middle like that. And then you can also see the new growth of the nest going upwards.
Yeah.
Presumably because the ones on the ground have got to now build up.
Yeah, that's incredible. This is, the information on these sociable weavers is so cool. Not only the research that you conducted, but also just their basic ecology and learning about that. So interesting.
Yeah, it's a really impressive social system, and it's a really impressive thing what they build, because so sometimes people call them architects or sort of bird architects, because it's really impressive how they can build these massive structures and keep them there for so many years, and it requires a lot of weaving and a lot of dedication for sure.
And I'm really glad to hear stories about the world from the perspective of the female birds, because it's often overlooked, and we need to find more examples of this, Krista.
Yeah, that's also what fascinates me about this research topic, is that it's not an obvious one. And so it's not an obvious thing that females can play such a big role in adjusting their investment even before offspring are born. Usually we look at things during the nestling period, and usually we may think that that's all what's happening, and that's all that explains the success of this individual or of this species. And there can be so many other things around, and I think that it's important to broaden a bit our mind and the way we think of things. And yeah, there are many studies now showing how important is the female's role in the reproductive decisions and in the reproductive output of a couple. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. We had so many good questions. Thank you all for participating and asking questions too.
Yeah.
Is there anything else before Rita has to go?
Just a thank you from me, and it was a great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you again for inviting me to share my work. I'm really honored to share it with this community. It's such nice people, such nice questions. It was a great experience.
We'll have you back in a year or two to talk about the cormorants.
Yes, I hope so. Yes.
Yeah, your work up there. That'll be great.
Cool.
Well, thank you all so much. It looks like there aren't any more questions. Rita, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your research with us. We really enjoyed having you, and we look forward to having you again in the future.
Thank you very much, Krista. Great hosting. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.